Hi, this is Geneva Reinhardt. I'm the managing editor of Hospitality Upgrade magazine, and today we have an expert panel discussing some of the important trends that are happening in the hospitality industry. Joining us today, we have John Burns, John Ng, and Jeremy Rock. Thank you guys for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
We are going to start today with some overall observation questions, and we will open this up to the group. And we are looking forward to hearing what you guys see from your perspective for the industry. What technologies are hotel operators overlooking today? And a follow-up question to that is, what is available today that has a potential to significantly improve operational efficiency and guest satisfaction? John, we'll start with you.
Very good. Well, in terms of what's being overlooked today in terms of technology, I don't so much see systems that are not implemented, but rather I see the current property management systems and some other technologies that hotels, by and large, have on board already that are being underused. In terms of the PMS, for the most part, understanding of the capabilities of the system already installed at the property are far below what they should be, which is to say that there are capabilities and reports that could give an important operational insight and actually could impact guest service. Reports and other capabilities that are not being used by the staff. They're not known. So my thought is that there's a need, there's real value in going back, refreshing the key staff members on the capabilities, the functions of the property management system in their respective areas, and saying, how can we make use of these capabilities? How can we benefit the hotel with them? How can we train our staff so that they're used on a consistent basis? That would be my first thought, the PMS. I'd add another couple of quick thoughts. The second is with respect to the website that many hotels operate, either on their own or through a brand. In many cases, the information is currently unappealing. There's lackluster descriptions of the hotel and of the individual rooms. We're looking to people to select our hotel, but in too many cases, there isn't a strong or compelling reason to do so, at least in terms of appealing photographs and persuasive phrasing on the website. In too many cases, the same photo is used for every room type. There isn't a strong differentiation between one room type and another to suggest to people that there's merit in moving up to a more expensive room type. So those are a couple things that I'd look for, Geneva.
Okay, thank you, John. John Ng?
I'll certainly build on what John has said. I agree that there's a lot of underused technology out there already, and ongoing and regular staff training, I think, is really important to get the best out of it. There's so much in there that, in every system that we all use, we never explore all the functionality that we have, and we really could make a difference by doing that. But equally, I think there's lost opportunities in staying with some older systems well beyond their most effective use date. There are so many systems out there today that are more capable in terms of integration with other systems that would give the hoteliers and their staff a much more comprehensive and accurate view of what's going on with their guests and the operation as a whole. There's a tendency, as we all know, in any industry, for people to hang on to systems long after better replacements are available. It seems to be quite acute in hospitality at the moment that there are many better integrated solutions out there that cover not just the front desk but channel management, revenue management, accounting, point of sale activities. It can all be tied together better than many existing systems allow, to give a much more operationally clear view of what's going on. And this feeds directly back into guest service. Guest service is so important that there's so much overlap between the brands and so much interchangeability between them that the only thing that really brings people back, other than loyalty points, is service and the ability to get that accurate picture of what guests want and really to their needs makes a big difference. I think there's a lot of lost opportunities there in looking at how to integrate these systems together on property and really make use of them. The other thing that I think has changed is that what people are not looking at is the impact of good user interfaces. There's a lot of the older systems are really awkward to use. They don't really help the staff understand what the data is and where it comes from or where it can be used. And I think there are more modern systems have a much more effective user interface to help the staff work through what they're doing, and that really can make a difference to guest service in particular. If you don't have to hunt for information, it's presented to you right there at the time you need it. There could be a lot of improvement in many hotels by moving up to a more modern approach like that.
Thank you. And Jeremy, your thoughts?
I agree with both Johns. I think that most of the technology at properties are underutilized. A lot of it has to do with just, falling back on training, loss of staff, etc. I think that there are a number of systems which probably should be let go. I think we keep some of the older systems on board just because of habit instead of looking at something that's newer, more efficient, and that is more interactive. I also think that a lot of people have an aversion to bringing in certain new systems, but maybe a little bit more leading edge and better integrated. But for me, I think the biggest thing is that we need to start understanding how people interact, and that the world's changing, and that we do need to include more mobility and the ability to interact with guests on a different platform, whether it be in person or whether it's through them actually contacting us. And I think, to John Burns' earlier point, what I've seen on websites is I don't think that they have adopted, newer ways and of refreshing themselves, as well as being more interactive from a mobile standpoint. Just walking around, it used to be that it was a younger generation that was actually using mobile devices, and now it's really across the board, across all generations. And I think we really need to be focused on social media and how we need to, sell the property. It's just different. And so I think a whole new refresh on the approach that we take with regards to the systems that we're using needs to be had. But for the most part, a lot of the systems that are in place just are underutilized, to everyone's point.
Okay. What is one of the most significant developments or advancements in your area of focus over the past several years? John Burns, we'll start with you.
I can think of several. I would mention mobile to begin with and the growth of mobile devices. I would also talk about social networks and the impact they have had, in particular TripAdvisor, in bringing transparency to the hotel industry, in revealing the best players and the weaker players. I think those are significant. But I would, at the top of the list, put the emergence and strengthening of online travel agencies. I think this has been a quiet revolution for hotels, and not one that we have embraced or dealt with very successfully. The truth is that online travel agents, and now adding to that group, meta search engines, and maybe even adding Google as a search engine in there as well. These entities have been very good in convincing the traveling public that online travel agencies, that meta search sites, and search engines like Google's, with its increasing hotel shopping functionality, are a better place to look than the brand websites of hotel companies. This is a seismic change. It has huge implications. I think in many cases, as hoteliers look out, they're looking for quick fixes and survival options, as opposed to ways that they can strategically reclaim ground. At this point, that strategic search for victory is not occurring, and OTAs and meta search engines are growing steadily stronger and steadily more influential in how we present and price our inventory. John?
It's very thought-provoking, John. I was thinking, from my viewpoint, one of the most dramatic things has been the improvement in interface capabilities between systems based on XML messaging. This has made such a massive difference in how we accumulate data across a property, and in how systems can exchange data to build a better picture of the property and of the guest activities. It used to be that interfaces were fragile and very limited. Now they're very much more flexible and capable of providing an awful lot of information from one system to another as needed, and that's really improved the way that we can accumulate knowledge about the property and the guest activities. So I would put that very high up in the way it's changed what we can do with the technology at the property level. I'd also put the development of better user interfaces in there as a significant change as well, that rather than forcing staff to use a very sort of engineering-type grid-based data display, there's a lot of very significant work being done on how people actually look at screens and where they need to get the information and how much information they can use at any one time, and how it should be presented so that they can grasp it quickly and use it to interact with guests right in front of them. And I really see that heading into a much more widespread area. It's very encouraging.
Jeremy?
So from my standpoint, of course I'm going to revert back to some of the infrastructure things, but I think the key thing is internet access has become the number one driver within hotels. If you don't have it, it's a big issue. And the number of devices that are connecting within the room, the whole complexity of the in-room technology has changed, the whole landscape's changed, given, the number of devices people want to connect, room automation, the whole video experience, etc. So really, and most of it is being driven by, converged networks now and bandwidth, and it's going to continue to be an issue. Likewise, cellular coverage, and how we connect and the various systems that we're connecting to. So for me, that's been a big area of focus, because we have to make this stuff work, and we have to make it seamless for everybody coming on board. And guests are now carrying upwards of 3-4 devices, etc., that need to be connected. So in order for us to satisfy the guests, we need to make sure that we have the right infrastructure in place, and we have a significant amount of bandwidth available. The other side of it is just the various applications, and the fact that a lot of them are moving to the cloud and are cloud-based, and being able to connect to them. So I think those are the key areas that have sort of hit my area substantially, and making sure that we've designed rooms and systems in order to operate together in that environment is being critical.
Yeah, let's continue to talk about infrastructure for a second. Jeremy, I think we'll start with you on this one, but how can hotels keep up with this insatiable Wi-Fi demand?
Well, I think the first thing is they need to actually have the right infrastructure in place. The old wireless networks just don't have the throughput and capacity, and also the density of what the coverage requirements are now has increased. So it's really a question of biting the bullet in some cases, and making sure that you put in your infrastructure into the hotel, which everybody always said, well, we want to move away from cable, but the reality is that you need to have a very robust wireless infrastructure, not only for the guests, but in order to run a lot of the mobile applications that the administrative and operational teams are using. So it's really a case of boosting up your wireless infrastructure in order to accommodate all the other systems that are out there. And the other side of it is making sure that you're using, the right equipment, but having significant bandwidth coming into your property in order to achieve, your requirements. So for me, it's a question of designing that correctly, selecting the right partners, and engineering it up on the front side to make sure that you have the wherewithal to cover you going forward. I also think that you're going to start to see a lot of offloading from cellular capacity onto the wireless networks, and they're going to become more saturated. So I think this is an area that most hotels are going to have to invest in, if they haven't done already, is upgrading their infrastructure and certainly their wireless networks.
Any thoughts from John or John?
I absolutely agree that the infrastructure is critical here, and I think for new build hotels, the fundamental nowadays, the baseline should be fiber optic network around the hotel. Copper's been expanded in its capabilities extensively over the years, and it's been amazing to me how far it goes. But every improvement is incremental and progressively more expensive. And going to fiber at the moment is about the same cost as going with copper, and it has huge, much more potential for handling future demand than copper will ever have. So I think for a new build, it's a given that you need to put in fiber networks probably directly to the room. Older properties for retrofit, that would require obviously a lot of work in getting into the structure of the building itself to run the fiber around. But depends at what point the hotel is on the renovation cycle, I guess. They really do need to address this, and copper is not going to have enough bandwidth long term to deal with it. I was wondering on the Wi-Fi thing. I agree with Jeremy that it's critical. You've got to have Wi-Fi everywhere. And while it's technically straightforward to put a wireless access point in every guest room, I'm still concerned about how those access points are connected back to the internet itself and what that implies for the infrastructure of the hotel. I don't know if Jeremy has any thoughts on that, whether putting an access point in every room would overstrain the existing network to the point where it wouldn't be usable at all. Jeremy?
Well, actually, I think part of the thing is, look, we're never going to exceed where we are in some cases on the copper for quite a while. The fact of the matter is, the access points have to be driven to that level. We now are just moving to AC and dual band within. But the reality is, it's really your backplane and your the fiber's really required in the risers primarily right now. There's a lot of talk about GPON and bringing fiber to the room, but the cost of the active components at this point and where we are with regards to bandwidth, I mean, that's something that everybody hasn't really taken into account. There's two aspects you need to look at with a wireless network. One is the throughput just for the wireless network, which is communicating internally within the building. The second is the bandwidth that's coming into the building and what's being utilized by the guests. And so, we rarely have the capacity for quite a while, even with copper, and you're still connecting copper to most of these devices. The aspect of GPON that's come across is interesting because in some cases it makes sense, but in other cases you still got a construction cost and cost of active equipment that needs to be factored in. So I think every case is different. It needs to be engineered according to the right budget and according to the needs and requirements of the hotel. But to your point, John, I think all these things need to be looked at and evaluated in the context of when is this going to be renovated for an existing build, and two, with regards to the new build, where do you spend dollars and money and how easy can it be upgraded? Definitely, there isn't a silver bullet for any one unique situation, but I definitely think that you need to really look at it closely to make sure that you're meeting your needs and requirements according to what you can afford and what your demographics are.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'd like to just add, at this point, it obviously is a major ongoing issue, and the demand for bandwidth doesn't seem to be slowing down. My overall thoughts are twofold. One is that the hotel needs to constantly upgrade its infrastructure to handle, to take advantage of the later technologies that do improve bandwidth and throughput. And the other is I see some form of tiered pricing as being an inevitable outcome for a while anyway, to handle people who really want to do movie streaming consistently in the hotel rooms as opposed to people who just want to check their email. I think maybe in 10 years the technology will have advanced to the point where we won't even think about this issue at all, that internet access will be available everywhere and as universally as ordinary electricity or hot water in hotels. But we're not there yet, and we're still building out the capability of handling this, and at the moment we do need to have some kind of control of shaping how much bandwidth is available to each guest and for what purpose. I think the basic service has to be free, but I do think there's a strong case for charging for much higher bandwidth usage as demanded by the guest. And I think people are beginning to accept that for now.
John Burns, did you have anything to add?
I think my colleagues have done well here. I would have just one closing thought, and that is I sympathize with hotels with respect to the cost of these ongoing upgrades and to the difficulty in estimating just how much bandwidth is going to be required. That said, I think bandwidth is mission critical. The lack of good, strong service is a deal killer, if you will, for hotel guests. They'll come once, they will find poor service, and they won't come again. So this has now become an issue that must be dealt with and dealt with effectively by hotels, or it's going to jeopardize their future success.
I absolutely agree with John on that. It's expensive, it's frustrating, it's inevitable, and it's got to be addressed. Just another survey came out just last week on what guests look for in hotels, and number one was still location, number two was internet access. And if you don't have internet access, nothing else the hotel offers really matters. They're not going to stay there. So it's got to be handled, and it is annoying, but it's mandatory, unfortunately.
While we're talking about networks and infrastructure, who owns the network? And who owns the issues that are affecting deployment of converged networks?
Well, from my perspective, Geneva, I think this is a big problem right now because from what I can see, most of the time it's your wireless service provider that's actually coming in and deploying that network. And in most cases, hoteliers are trying to save money by going to a converged network. I know that a lot of directives from a lot of the corporations and flags and brands are to have separate networks, but in reality, that's not really what's transpiring. So what tends to happen is that all the in-room technology that now needs to be connected from, online electronic door locks to energy management systems to room automation is all connecting through the same network and in many cases communicating through the wireless network as well. So it's very important that we understand who is actually deploying the network, who's designing it, and who's supporting it. And in most cases, that's turning out to be the wireless provider. And what I would encourage hotels to do is make sure that the network is engineered to their specifications, taking into account all of the security measures, PCI compliance, etc., because the devices that are being carried and connected to over that network not only include the guest internet access, but also all of the rapid response systems and any point of sale or PMS connectivity, etc. And so I think that's something which we need to sort of factor in and be cognizant of, is the fact that this is probably the most important network going into the hotel, and hoteliers need to spend the time and effort in researching and making sure they're partnering with the right solution provider, if that makes sense.
It's really an interesting question because it used to be that whoever was building the hotel would put in the infrastructure and design it to the operator's needs, and now there are, as Jeremy says, there are other vendors willing to provide the network for you to get their own service spread throughout the hotel. And I think it's not just the wireless providers. There are also companies or vendors such as locking system providers or guest request application providers who will provide their own Wi-Fi network throughout the hotel so that their own products can run over it. And while that can be an attractive installation option for the property, it does lead to all kinds of complications, as Jeremy says, as to who actually is responsible for maintaining that and what other services can run on that network. Can they actually share services between different apps? Who's handling the security and managing it? It's a tricky question, and ultimately, of course, it comes down to the hotel owner and general manager. They've got to make sure that it's all configured the way they need to run the property and be secure. And while they can certainly accept input and implementation services from other people, they've got to manage how it's done and configured for the operational benefit. John, you have any other comments on that?
No, I think you've covered it.
Okay, we'll skip over to some issues that are affecting everyone, the sunsetting of Windows XP this year and then the Server 2003 next July. What challenges are you seeing that are associated with these?
Well, from my perspective, Geneva, one of the things that's sort of happening is I don't know that everybody's kicked into gear to upgrading and replacing the Windows XP issue. It's now beyond their life. And where the next date that's going to come in and be factored and be kind of critical for the industry is the fact that I believe the next patch gets released somewhere around May 13th, May 14th. I may be wrong on the date. But that's going to be the new patches for Windows 7 and 8. And once that occurs, it's really going to give a lot of the hackers a blueprint for understanding where the deficiencies are in Windows XP. And so the fear is that once that happens, hackers are going to start to sort of go about trying to look at who hasn't upgraded or who's still running XP. There are a number of interface PCs that are running on it. There are a number of critical computers that are attached to that network that are running on it, and it is an issue that's going to need to be addressed as soon as possible, or those networks have the potential to be breached. So I think it's something that is, I don't know that the industry has really taken that seriously, but and whether it will, time will tell as to what kind of advantage the hackers are going to take on that. I think the second thing is the next milestone that we're going to be concerned about is Server 2003. There's certain key point-of-sale systems that are operational within the industry and many other systems on networks. That is being sunsetted in July next year. And so either they're going to upgrade or they're going to have an upgrade path. And some of these applications haven't been designed to run on anything else. So I think it's something that's going to start to affect a lot of hotels and hoteliers and operators. And so I think it's something that we're going to need to focus on as an industry and get it addressed. I know that a lot of people have already started doing that, but I know certainly we're involved in some of this stuff right now, and we're fast-tracking everything to try and get ahead of that next day.
My thoughts originally were, is this another Y2K all over again? And I think there are some similarities. There are known deficiencies in the system that will become more apparent over time. The difference this time is that there's no deadline by which we know things will begin not to work on computers. We know instead that a lot of these systems will become increasingly vulnerable, and I think it's going to take probably some massive data breach through an XP system to really wake people up to that. And as an aside, I also believe that a lot of ATMs run on XP as well, which is kind of a scary thought. But I think it's not as widespread as Y2K. There was no doubt when Y2K came around that some systems would not work properly and would not report dates properly. That was a given. In this case, we're just looking at potential breaches and potential risk. And as we've seen with the slow rate of PCI adoption, a lot of people are sort of waiting for something to trigger a need in their minds to do that and do the patching. And even if they do, it's no guarantee that they won't get breached some other way in the future. So I think what we need to really focus on is raising people's awareness of the risks that they're running here and make the migration path as smooth as we possibly can so that they do upgrade. It's not a panacea. Fixing Y2K took away the problem, which is why so many people thought of it as an anticlimax. This isn't saying this is not going to take away the problem. It's just going to reduce the risk significantly, and I think that's worth doing. But we need to make it easy for people to do that migration, and I don't think we've got to that point yet.
Well said. John Burns, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay. Well, we touched a little bit on mobility, and that, of course, is a very hot topic. When do you think the guests will be able to use their guest phones, their cell phones, to do anything within the guest room or as part of an all-in-one amenity during their stay?
Well, from my perspective, I think it's going to be a little while because the locks that are currently on the doors, for example, need to be upgraded in order to accept cellular communications, etc. And then the second part of it is that most phones operate on different protocols and have different frequencies and things of that nature. So even for example the RFID components on them need to be standardized. So I think it may be a while because while we may have certain things standardized here in the U.S., there's a ton of different phone manufacturers across the board and internationally. And while you have products such as OpenWave, etc., that are out there, it's not widely adopted. And so I think a lot of these technologies are going to take a while for the cell phones to be able to tie into that kind of room component. That said, a lot of the room automation systems, those that's a different story, because if you download an app or you actually are able to pull down the application, then you can actually control the room and do everything else. In the room, and control it from the guest mobile device. It's going to take a while as they get there.
Okay, John or Jeremy, I think we may have lost you. John Ng, do you have anything to add?
Yes, actually, it's interesting. All the things that you list down here, as when will be guests be able to use their phones to do? Open the door and use as an amenity, check in, check out, folio, coupons, upsell, all the rest of that. They can do all of that today. They just have to do it in a very fragmented fashion. There are definitely ways, as Jeremy mentioned, open ways that any phone can be used as a key into an open ways equipped lock, but there aren't that many hotels that actually have the locks. Same applies to NFC equipped phones. A lot of RFID locks can handle NFC communications, but people aren't in the habit of using their phones for NFC communications. There are lots of apps that will handle guest requests before they arrive at the hotel and while they're at the property and looking for room service, whatever. You can do a lot of this stuff off your phone now, but it needs to be really interfaced into the back of house systems, and there are a lot of different ones in different hotels that make that a complex challenge. Same thing with controlling the room that Jeremy mentioned, with controlling the lighting, the thermostat, the drapes, and all that kind of stuff. It's technically doable, but with so many different systems in the hotels, there's still no common interface that will let guests download one app and have that work in multiple properties. So all these things are a major barrier to widespread adoption. I think what we're going to be seeing is, or we're needing, is a move to a different approach to this kind of technology that is more universal. I think it's going to have to be Bluetooth-based, because Apple is not going to put NFC on the iPhone, and that immediately locks out half of your traveling public that use iPhones. So I think it's going to be Bluetooth-based for communications. I think we may be seeing more interface devices that will take whatever messaging is required in a particular property and convert it into a universal set of commands that a generic app on people's phones will use. I do think that the door lock situation will improve over time, but there's a lot of retrofit required on existing door locks, most of which these days I think are still magstripe and will require some form of adapter to use Bluetooth or maybe a 2D barcode scanner as you do for airport check-in and so on. So I think we're moving to a more universal app. At the moment, there's a lot of people very interested in this and trying out point solutions and exploring just how this works in the real world. But it's still too fragmented, and I see probably another 2 to 5 years before it's this kind of universally accepted approach of using your phone for anything you want in pretty much any hotel. It's going to take a while. 2 to 5 years to get the technology out there, probably a lot longer before every hotel is equipped to handle it. Mr. Burns?
I would zoom out on this question a bit and think less about the specific technology and more about the competitive differentiation opportunity for hotels who are aggressive in empowering people to use their mobile devices. Everyone has a mobile device in their hand. Increasingly, they can be used as wallets, as GPSs, as photo albums, you name it. It can track your air flights and do 100 different or 1,000 different things. I think there is an opportunity for the hotels who are aggressive and say, we are going to spend the money in order to differentiate ourselves as being technologically in the lead, attuned to millennials, attuned to the people who are the early adopters, or maybe not early adopters, who are in the mainstream now and are anxious to use their mobile device as an appliance of convenience, real convenience. It's to the hotel industry's detriment if we say we're not going to replace our door locks till the handles fall off. Somebody's going to be ahead of us if that's the case, and it's going to be at our risk if we take that position. Geneva?
John, staying with you, what advice would you give to properties who are trying to incorporate the, thinking of mobile within their operations?
My focus is on reservations and distribution, so I'm less operationally focused, but I would say there's a need when we're talking about any sort of interaction to stop thinking about the PC and our presentation on the PC as the definition of how we are achieving our presentation and our communication of the value proposition. I believe that we need to reverse it and take it from PC first and mobile device second to thinking first and foremost about how our presentation and value proposition appears on tablets and on mobile devices. If we do those two areas well, we'll be more than adequate on PCs. But there's a danger in old thinking, as it were, of always thinking of the PC first when, in fact, our client base is sitting at home at night or sitting in their car scanning for hotels and travel opportunities. And if they find us lacking in our presentation on those devices as they are on the move, it isn't good for us. Back to you.
I completely agree, John. I saw a recent survey that the conventional wisdom that people only book hotel rooms on their phones at the last minute isn't actually true. They're actually using them more and more to book further ahead, which makes it absolutely imperative that you have the right presentation on the phone to make this easy to find a room, easy to book it. And I think that discipline is really good for the rest of the industry, in that it forces you to focus on the essentials and make sure that you're presenting information clearly and usefully. And that discipline can spread back to so many other areas, as I talked about earlier. And my advice to hotels would be much the same as John's. Make sure you're thinking what you want the user to do with the app on what device, and make sure that you're focused on providing enough information in an appealing way to make that simple. And I think it applies to the admin systems as well. There's so much you can do with mobile devices around the property. Obviously, tablets for mobile check-in up in the room or wandering around the lobby are good, as long as you can work out how to get the keys to the guest, which is still an ongoing challenge. But I think there's a lot of admin apps that would benefit from mobility as well, such as housekeeping and engineering. And also from a management viewpoint, giving them access to VIP lists or the current status of the property or potential problems in the restaurants with people not getting service in fast enough time. All of these things allow managers to be kept informed of what's going on and respond quickly. One thing I've heard touted around as a challenge is if you're giving people too many apps with information on them, they tend to focus on the screen in front of them instead of looking at the guest in the eye and making eye contact. And I think it's really important that if you're going to provide an app to help your staff interact with the guest, you have two things in mind. One is make sure that the information presented on that app is a useful set of information for that particular guest interaction. It doesn't try and compress everything you know about the guest onto one small screen. Keep it focused. And the other is to train the staff in the value of eye contact. You may have all the information you ever need on your mobile device, but the guest needs to know that you're looking at them and thinking about them and not just focused on what you see on the screen. After all, as far as they know, you could be checking Facebook. So training is as important as providing the tool itself. Jeremy?
I agree with a lot of what both of you have said. I think one of the things that I'm sort of seeing is that I'm seeing a lot more adoption of the tablets and mobile devices in operations for a number of different areas and reasons. I think the big thing is, we're all seeing challenges with regards to the wireless connectivity and also the devices themselves. Some of the current point-of-sale devices don't work that effectively, can't move between access points. But the newer technology that's starting to come out within the next 6 months promises to be a lot more effective. And I think we're going to see quite a game change in some of these areas just because of the ability for staff to respond to guest requests and to create efficiencies and within the operation. We're definitely seeing a big uptick with regards to an uptake with regards to wireless. but there are still some teething issues related to how the apps are displayed and the existing applications that are out there that aren't really geared up to work with tablet devices, etc. But I think that's all going to be cleared up in the near future, and certainly it's the way that things are going to be moving forward.
Okay, good. That was all great information and great advice. We're going to switch a little bit to a topic that continues to be a challenge for the entire industry and pretty much the entire global planet. It's data security and securing personal data. There's some requirements coming for October of 2015, and there's a question about some of the proposed solutions that will be available or that are available now. Does anyone have any comments about securing personal data and what properties and hotels in general can do with this challenge?
Yeah, I think you're referring to the EMV side of things with regards to chip and PIN and what's going to happen when that gets adopted. The thing that I sort of look at is that it's really the expense that's going to be borne by the merchant. You know, we've got to get that game plan in place. What I'm not seeing is a lot of answers and, information from some of the solution providers on what they're recommending and how that's going to be implemented. And that's a little concerning given the time frame that we're dealing with right now, especially from the point-of-sale providers that are the primary, which is the primary application that's going to really require this. So I think these are some of the things that we're going to need to focus on as an industry and really fast-track, because when you start to think of how many people have to change out, that's a concern of mine, and also what the solution is, how it's going to operate, how that's going to affect the operation just in general. I mean, I'm used to seeing this on the international front, but we're not used to seeing it here in the U.S., and there's going to be a training and learning curve associated with it. Geneva, I think that's what you're referring to on that, or is it additional data security concerns that you had?
Well, it was basic data security and securing personal data question, but also specifically the EMV requirements that are coming for next fall.
We also got PCI 6.0 that's coming out, which we're going to have to deal with, and that's something which is going to affect a lot of the mobility aspects as well.
Gina, I believe your question covers two areas. We tend to think, in talking about data security, about PCI and credit card data security, but I do believe we need to broaden our focus and think also about what we're referring to as PII, personally identifiable information. In the hotel systems, we hold a remarkable amount of personally identifiable information, most of it unencrypted, some of it with relatively weak barriers around it, barriers to access. I suspect at some point we're going to have an incursion that's going to grab a great deal of that data, and it will be a significant problem for the hotel brand that suffers that incursion. We need to think more seriously beyond PCI and into the area of securing PII.
I'd agree completely with that. I think from the PCI viewpoint and credit card data, I think that has been addressed reasonably successfully. There will always be new versions of PCI coming out as more experience is gained on how people get into networks and people try and close the loopholes again. That's going to be an ongoing process. And I am seeing some activity from point-of-sale vendors on mobile devices improving the security and bringing out the EMV certification. There was an announcement just last week from one vendor on that they have that capability now. But there's an awful lot of other older devices out there that don't have it and will find it hard to retrofit. And I do think this is going to be a challenge for some time. The whole PII issue is extremely thorny because, as a hospitality industry, you need to have personally identifiable information on your guests so you recognize them and give them the service they expect. Keeping that secure without hampering the hospitality aspect of what you're doing is going to be incredibly challenging. And I worry that we're going to be seeing more government regulation around that. That will make it difficult to, you can't guarantee security. But I worry that we may be hampered in our hospitality efforts by misguided attempts to over-regulate the industry to keep it secure. Maybe I worry too much, and practicalities of this will mean that we'll find a way of dealing with it. But I do worry about it. Part of my thought on this is also tempered by knowledge that, for example, Canada has had EMV technology, the chip and pin technology on their credit cards for years, and yet it's still only in the last year that credit card companies and hotel technology companies have developed interfaces that will handle those cards for credit card transactions. And there doesn't seem to have been the demand from the hotels to import that technology until quite recently, even though the guests they have are carrying the cards already. So I wonder how what it's going to take to actually drive that in adoption in hospitality in the U.S. And I fear, like our other two guests here today, that it is going to take a severe data incursion to wake people up to the problems and really drive adoption. It's an ongoing challenge. I don't see us ever getting totally on top of it, but it's something that we'll have to address continuously.
One of the things, Geneva, is that PCI 3.0 is going to be a lot more restrictive in what it does and what it requires, and I think that's a big change that's coming down when they start to enforce it, and I think that's going to address a lot of these concerns as well. I think, to the earlier point, I mean, when we start to talk about PII, we also need to be cognizant of what the rules and regulations are, and within not only just your local ordinance, your state, your federal requirements, but also internationally. And it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for those companies that deal with a lot of international guests and abroad, and to be able to standardize this particular this issue. It's going to be a big thing to try and manage.
Yeah, I think we already have this issue, as you know, Jeremy, with European standards being very different to US ones, and that's not going to change. There's going to be different standards everywhere, and I see the challenge here as reconciling the requests of individual users who may want to restrict the use of their information using some kind of generic app they might have on their phone to say, I will only share this information with these people under these circumstances for this period of time, which might be very useful for a travel itinerary, for example, but you wouldn't want necessarily that data to be continued outside that immediate event. And the demands of marketing folks and hospitality operations companies that really want that information to help drive their own business and provide good service. It's going to be very interesting to see how this develops in reconciling those two opposing viewpoints.
Let's keep talking a little bit more about knowing your guest, and let's talk a little bit further about big data. What are the critical factors that you see to making CRM work? John Burns, we'll start with you.
There are so many components in a successful CRM operation, and it's a challenge to combine and operate all of them effectively. There is certainly technology, but I go back even before we have the discussion of CRM technology and think that the slogan of garbage in, garbage out needs to be borne in mind. We need to think in terms of disciplined data entry. It starts with checking guests in and getting the appropriate clean data, even at the reservation process. And then making sure that the data put into any of the records, reservation records, other records we create, profiles and so on, is as complete and as consistent with hotel and brand data format policies as possible. Then the challenge is to aggregate that data, dedupe it, cleanse it further so that it becomes a series of usable records that we can put in front of staff. That achieved, if it can be achieved, it becomes a huge resource within digital marketing and marketing in a very targeted fashion to people who are receptive to our messages, then delivering the appropriate recognition on property. PMS vendors, digital marketers, others are making strides in putting together the infrastructure and allowing us to deliver messages. What we need to make sure is that we're not putting garbage in the front end, but in fact we're accumulating and stewarding good, clean information that we can use successfully in a CRM program. John?
Totally agree. John, I've made the comment before, I think CRM is probably the most strategic system any hotel operation can have, given that it holds all the information you have on all of your customers. And it absolutely has to be clean data. And that's really gritty work, making sure that you have enough of it in the first place, and you encourage, through whatever competitions or training you need with your staff, encourage them to get the data in as completely and accurately as they can. Constantly keeping it accurate through monitoring changes of address, name changes through marriage or divorce. So many other factors affect what people want. Even changes of preferences over time are important. Once you've got that, knowing what questions to ask of that database to actually produce meaningful insights is important. You can't just sort of run some random analyses through it and see what pops up. You have to know what you're trying to achieve and who might be the keys to giving you that information. John brought up a very, very important point on property too, which is once you've accumulated all this information about your guest and you're working on recognizing them and catering to their preferences and requirements, you have to get that information about those preferences and requirements back out in front of the people who are doing the one-on-one interaction with the guest. It's relatively straightforward to accumulate information, dedupe it, clean it, and keep it accurately centrally. It's much harder to get it back out into the field in front of the people who are actually interacting with the guest. And part of that, following on from that, is not overdoing it. Everybody has a limit as to how often they want to be contacted about something or under what circumstance. So it needs to be handled sensitively and allow the guest to control how often they hear from people on what topics. But it's doable, and it's very important to get it right, and it's very effective when you get it right. It just needs to be done with care and sensitivity. Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the comments. I mean, the biggest issue has always been, we're collecting all this information, and it just becomes unwielding to use. I also think that, for the most part, most hotels, and especially independents, don't do anything with it. I mean, and it's not just the PMS, etc. It's all systems. We're capturing so much information in strategic areas that I just don't think that a lot of people are taking advantage of it, and it's becoming, the more information we have, the harder it is obviously to handle. I think that at some point we've got to get to streaming this back down and bringing it back down, because it is great information, but I think there's two sides to it as well. Some of it is over the top and information that really is too private and maybe has a big brother element to it, and then other information really is relevant. And I just think that at some point we're going to have to find some kind of a silver bullet in order to get the right mix.
I just wanted to re-emphasize the whole point about getting it accurate as well. It's so important to keep data clean and accurate, because people are expecting these days that you know a certain amount about them and their preferences. They expect you to be tracking some aspects of their previous stays, and if you get it wrong, the impact is much worse than if you didn't try and do it in the first place, because you build people's expectations up to the point where they're expecting better service. Misspelling their name or getting their birthday wrong, critical. It's just not what you're trying to achieve. So it's really sensitive data in every sense and must be handled cleanly and with consideration. And that's all I have to say on that one.
I think the other thing is that the whole location tracking aspect of things has got, it depends on which side of the fence you're on that, because that can be extremely useful. It can also be extremely intimidating from a guest standpoint, knowing people know exactly where you are at all times. So I think that's something that you're going to have to find an even hand in terms of what information to use and how to use it, and in whose hands. And it's not just the information that we're thinking about from that standpoint. It's also information such as, we're getting more and more sophisticated in CCTV and security systems. And what we're able to do with those systems and the digital, storage capacity of those systems, can really impact things if it gets into the wrong hands. And so we just need to be sensitive across the board, not just to big data, but also to what information. Remember, it's not just information on text, etc. It's also video that we're capturing.
We're coming to the end of our podcast, but I'm going to ask two more questions of our panel. And the first one is, if you were to offer just one piece of technology or system-related advice, what would it be? John Burns, we'll start with you.
I'm going to go back to my distribution focus, and I'm going to say it is to provide an even more intense focus on the website of the hotel. I think in many cases, while we are struggling to compete against other hotels and in many respects more directly against online travel agencies, we do a poor job of projecting the reasons why someone should stay at our hotel. We have limp descriptions. We use the same photo for multiple room types. We have different guest room categories, but there's no clear reason why a more expensive category is a more desirable one to stay in. We do a poor job of incorporating local information. And people don't come to stay at the hotel just for the hotel. They come for the community. The hotel is the portal to the local area. We need to look hard and do a better job of communicating why our hotel and our community is the right one for someone to choose. That means data, it means photographs, it means catering to the mobile device that person is using to do their research. I believe there is an important strategic opportunity for hotel operators.
My one piece of technology-related advice for hoteliers would be to quote a phrase from Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy: don't panic. Things are changing fast. Certainly we're seeing an awful lot of interesting technology developments, but seriously, my core advice, and hopefully not to steal Jeremy's thunder, is focus on infrastructure. We don't really know what applications are going to be coming down the pike. We do know that they're going to need to communicate with each other. We don't know how much bandwidth they're going to need. They will need a fair amount. If you have anything to spend on technology at the moment, put it into the infrastructure in your hotel. That will allow you to add new applications and new interconnections between those applications as they become available. It's so fundamental. I think it's really important to do that. Jeremy?
Yeah, no, absolutely, John. You're spot on. Infrastructure is actually a key. I mean, it's one of the things. It's one of the reasons why I've had to focus on that heavily over the last number of years. I think, for me right now, I think wireless is going to be the big thing that we need to be providing, because everything is moving, is becoming more mobile. Everybody's moving to wireless technologies, and so everything within the guest rooms, everything the guest is carrying, and how we are actually operating throughout the hotel is turning to a wireless environment. And you need a very robust and solid wireless network throughout the hotel in order to carry off and operate the applications and systems that you want to provide, and to provide your guests with the service that they need. So outside of, I think it's very interesting because John Burns' focus is really on bringing people to the hotel, and that's obviously probably number one always. But once they're there, you need to have that infrastructure in place. And to John's point, unless you design and future-proof your property, you won't be able to keep up with technology. We know it's changing. We know the curved screens are going to be coming out. There's all sorts of the latest stuff, but all of it is going to need that infrastructure to reside and operate on, and that is key. So, 100% behind you, John.
Good. For our closing question, we're going to ask you to put your Google goggles on for just a second and look into the future. And what might we see in your area of expertise, say, 5 years from now? John Burns?
I see something that's potentially disturbing to the hotel industry, and that is a change in our business model. I think if we stand back and look at the impact that online travel agencies and meta search engines, and the search engines themselves, especially Google, are having on our marketplace, it's not impossible that in 5 years' time we will have moved even more profoundly to a wholesaler-retailer model in which hotels give the vast amount of their inventory to retailers, those being online travel agencies and their peers. And actually, hotels do very little retail, which is to say direct sales to guests through the global distribution systems, through brand.com, through call centers. I think there's a very real possibility that online travel agencies will move from somewhere around 10% of our sales to a significantly higher proportion. That has many implications, not least of which revolve around the ultimate profitability of hotel operations.
Yes, I think it is a scary thought. I do think things are changing. I see a lot of consolidation in this industry and the adoption of more widespread, more fully integrated systems, which aren't necessarily coming from the major vendors we have now. In 5 years, maybe not so much, but it's definitely going to see a trend towards that. I do see pretty much every system being delivered from the cloud as opposed to on property. I think there are just too many issues with trying to maintain them on property that people will finally accept that it's okay to use the cloud, and will by default go there for their integrated solutions, either from one vendor or multiple vendors. So overall, I guess I see the growth of those two main factors: better integrated systems and mostly sourced from the cloud.
So from my standpoint, Geneva, I think I see myself moving to more something that's tied into mobility and tied into wireless communications, because I think that's where a lot of my focus is probably going to be placed. As John indicated, I think most of your applications are going to reside in the cloud. I think the infrastructure within the hotels and the amount of servers and space required in most of your main distribution frames and computer rooms and head ends all going to dissipate down to almost nothing. It's all going to reside primarily on having solid bandwidth and infrastructure coming into the hotel, and primarily being able to operate from a wireless standpoint. Whether that's reached in 5 years, I don't know, because every time we think we're going to come down to that kind of a position in 5 years, you tend to find out that the existing legacy infrastructure and some of the restrictions are going to curtail you. It's great to look at it from a new build standpoint, but from an existing build, it's tough to do. But I think definitely from the area of mobility and mobile applications and wireless communications, I think that's probably where my focus is probably going to lend itself.
Well, thank you to our panel of experts, John Burns, John Ng, and Jeremy Rock. We really appreciate you spending some time with us and giving us your thoughts on many of these questions as we go into high tech. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, Geneva. Thank you.
Always a pleasure,
Thanks,
Geneva.
Geneva.